Okay, let's go over setting up a first patch on the tetrachords using MIDI. Some of the concepts in this video are dealt with in much more detail in later videos in the manual. So if I skim over something, just go and watch the video dedicated to that specific concept later in the manual. But let's set up the connections. So there are two ways of connecting MIDI out from the tetrachords. The first is using the 3.5 MIDI jack, and you can use a cable like this, which is an adapter from 3.5 to the normal MIDI DIN. Just plug it in there. And on the back of the tetrachords, there is a small switch which can change from type A to type B. And you can then just match the gear that you're trying to connect to with the tetrachords, and it will work seamlessly. So the other way of connecting MIDI is using the USB-C jack. You can connect like a DAW computer or iPad or MIDI synth over USB-C. But just note that this is not a host. So you can't connect a MIDI keyboard that requires a host and use just the tetrachords. But it will work with all MIDI over USB-C. Okay, so let's take a look at setting up the patch. The first thing that's always a good idea to do is to initialize the song. So let's get the song back to its default state. Press and hold song and press reset. Or you can press and hold song and press shift. Now, the tetrachords song is in its default state. We can have a look at the tracks. So there are 4 tracks on the tetrachords, and by default, these output on MIDI channel 1 to 4 respectively. So track 1 is going to go out MIDI channel 1. How to see the MIDI output assignments is by pressing and holding shift and pressing MIDI out, which is underneath the latch button there. Press and hold that. Then you can let go of shift. And you'll see here that the 8 RGB buttons now represent the first 8 MIDI out channels. And to see the second out, 8, so 9 to 16, you can move between the 2 pages of MIDI out using the left and right button. So first page, as shown by this pill, is 1 to 8. Second page, 9 to 16. So you can see here on track 1, it's going out MIDI channel 1. We can change that assignment simply by turning that off. Now it's going out MIDI channel 3, or it can go out multiple channels. So now it's going out 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. But I'm just going to leave it on 1. And we can see on MIDI track 2, it's going out MIDI channel 2, track 3, 3, 4, 4. So that's how to set up the MIDI output assignment for each track. Once that's set up, we can start playing some notes. So let's input some notes on the 8 RGB buttons. Okay, we have some notes, but nothing's playing. Why is that? Well, we're not triggering them. So the way to trigger a track is using the trig inputs. You can also trigger using MIDI in, but we're not going to deal with that. We'll deal with that in the next video. So we're just focusing on using trigs to trigger the MIDI tracks, trigger the tracks. So I'm going to plug in a trigger to trig in 1, which is going to trigger track 1. I can use a gate signal as well. Trigger or gate. I'm just going to plug in a fast trigger from the trigger right. So now you can see in the Ableton set that I've set up, I have 4 tracks, and MIDI is coming in from the tetrachords, and it's coming in on MIDI channel 1. Awesome. Now, I'm not going to go into detail right now about what everything does on the panel, but you can play around with the knobs and just see what they do and find something that you like. I quite like that. We call this a pattern. So this is your first pattern. It's showing here, the pill here shows that you're on pattern 1. And that's awesome. So let's add another track. we're on track 1. Let's move to track 2 and plug in another trigger. This is a division of the first clock. I'm going to plug it into trig in 2, add some notes. Cool, so now we have a little counter melody. I'm going to press and hold octave and select a lower octave for those notes on track 2. Cool. And then on track 3, I'm going to have a very slow clock every 16th and plug that into trig in 3. Go to track 3. And on track 3, I'm going to input a chord. So I'm going to change it from ARP to chord because MIDI is polyphonic. And I'm going to input. And I'm going to move it down an octave again. Alright, now we have 2 little melodies and 1 chord playing. And if I move this encoder, they're all going to move together. And you can find out more information about why that happens in the link video, and in the scales video, and in the CV1 first patch video. Sweet. And now you've basically finished setting up the first patch on the MIDI. But what's cool is that the same information that's going to the MIDI is also going out CV. So track 1 is linked to CV output 1. So if I plug in an oscillator to CV out 1 and turn that up, you can hear that the same notes are playing out the CV. And I'm going to plug another oscillator from CV out 3 and turn that up. This is the chord channel track. So track 3 has the chord on it. If I turn that up, we get like a bass root note from that chord coming out the CV. And if I move it, it's going to move as well. So this is a great way of combining your modular oscillators with other synths or with plugins on your DAW, and just get everything working together, and you can jam with everything in the studio basically all at once. So that's how to set up your first MIDI patch on the tetrachords.